if I can call you that. Sam and I are always happy to see so many friendly faces at our conference, and we tell people this is like a family affair. People know each other, and it's always such a nice affair. But anyhow, enough love talk from me. There are some stalls all the way around. We'll explain a little later. And Sam's going to announce the first speaker. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you and welcome to Flow.
Well, good morning, everyone. Just a couple of announcements. I think the first one is for a friend of ours. It's his birthday today, Carl. He's only 70 years old, but he looks about 40. So it's his 50th birthday, so we welcome him anyway. Thank you so much. There's a conference in April the 16th at the Freemasons Hall in Florida, and he says drumming is used throughout the world by people from every possible tribal link. It has symbolic links with the centre of the world or the world tree. Its roundness reflects the wholeness of the cosmos, while the beat is the pulse of life. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Philip Medley.
Morning, folks. We're going to do, as I said, 5 or 10 minutes of drumming to break up the atmosphere. I'm the warm-up man today, so you get a bit of drumming to warm up. Any people that are not playing anything, if you just absorb the energy of the drums, if you sat there thinking, oh, my back aches, I've got my knee hurts or whatever, just allow the energy and the sound of the drums to infiltrate the part that's aching. Allow it to come in. You'll often find that it breaks up the energy. Just the block that's giving you the backache or the knee ache. So just allow the sound to swamp over you and see if anything happens. But basically, it's just to break up the energy of the room, get into the mood of the day, and it'll just be 5 or 10 minutes. So it's a free-for-all. You don't have to know anything about music. It's just basically shamanic drumming. So you get this atmosphere going. Can you hear me down here? Right, so we basically do it on this beat. It's a free-for-all. You're not restricted in what you do. You can do anything you like, but we'll just keep it going 5 or 10 minutes, get some energy going. So this beat. Thanks for that. Thanks for joining in. Really enjoyed that. I'm warm, I don't know about you though. Okay, first slide then. Now, for those, I don't want to repeat myself, so for those who've seen me before, I've been on a few times here, and people in St Anne's have been familiar with me by now. So, if you've seen me before, I'm not repeating what I've done before. I'll be covering some of the old ground, but it's basically different material. I'll just go back a bit and explain that over the last 5-6 years, myself and Christine have been travelling around the world, activating sacred sites, energy points. Those energy points have been called Stargates because they're interdimensional portals. And the whole story is the reason why we're going back around the world and opening these 12 major portals is that in ancient times, Atlantean times, we were responsible for shutting these doorways down to stop negative agenda beings from using these to travel backwards and forwards onto this earth plane. So that's the story in a nutshell of what the Stargates are about. So in their travelling, we've been to places like Bolivia, Peru, Easter Island, China, Tibet, Nepal, Italy, France, and of course the British Isles, because that's included as well. There is a major Stargate on the British Isles. So these dimensional doorways used to be used for interdimensional travel and basically space travel. In ancient times, we hear a lot about UFOs, etc., but the majority of beings in the universe travel by these doorways, and that was a way of getting onto the earth plane through these doorways. But as I said, there was an infiltration of negative beings taking over this earth, and they were using these doorways to appear on the earth when it used to be a free-for-all. So, thousands of years ago, there was a task force put out to actually shut down these doorways. And the only way they can be used nowadays is with special codings carried by people who have certain codes and are able to use these doorways. At the moment, the human race isn't really ready to use them again, but we've come to a point in evolution where we're sort of, our evolution has reached that point where we're more open, we understand a lot more, the old knowledge is coming back, and eventually we'll be able to start using the doorways again. But for the moment, these doorways are used to present into the earth new energies to raise the vibration of the planet, raise the vibration of ourselves. So I'll just show you the next slide is just one of the, I picked this doorway because it's an obvious one. For those who haven't seen it before, this is in Peru. It's on the edge of Lake Titicaca. It's called Amurumuru by the locals. And what that means in their language is gateway to the gods. So they've known for a long, long time that this gateway was a gateway to other realms. So it's common knowledge for the locals, but it's not common knowledge for the rest of the world. The doorway itself, the large part of it, is 7 meters high and is 7 meters across. The small doorway is 2 meters high. And either side, where you see the two grooves as it's been cut into the bedrock, there's two spiral energies. One flows in one direction, and the other side, it flows in another direction. We spent about 3 hours or so with the group of us reactivating this doorway. And the feeling you get when you actually stood next to it is if your consciousness seems to disappear and leave your body, and you feel as if you are going somewhere else. It's an amazing feeling. But obviously the body stays here because it's not of a vibration to be able to go through the doorway, but your consciousness certainly does travel and go through the doorway. So I just wanted to really show one of the doorways to show they don't all look like this. In fact, some of them don't look like doorways at all. They look like a pile of rocks in the middle of nowhere. But this particular one looks like it should be a Stargate. And my favourite program at the moment is Stargate, but if anybody else watches that, because it's so related to this subject, and although it's on a 3-dimensional level, these gates are interdimensional. So not only do you travel to other realms of 3-dimensional realms, but you can travel to other realms of other dimensions as well. So that's what these are used for. Over the time we've been opening doorways, we've actually had other beings come through the doorway from the other side. Once we've opened it, beings from the Pleiades star system have entered through the doorway as soon as we've opened it. We've felt the energy. You obviously can't see them because they're a higher energy, but they've come straight through the doorway as we've opened it. One of these was in the actual museum in Cairo, the Egyptian doorways. They'd actually moved it from the site to put it in the museum, but it's still active as a dimensional doorway. So as we opened this huge doorway, beings came straight through the doorway. You could feel the energy. Those that were sensitive could stood there and felt like there was a huge wave coming over them. So these things do happen to the sensitives. To anybody that isn't sensitive, just look at you, well, nothing's happening. Well, that's fine, fair enough. It is other dimensions, other vibrations, so you have to be sensitive. So what I'm going to do is sort of quickly gone over why we've ended up going around the world doing the travelling. We're still doing it, it's ongoing. But I want to go back to, people keep asking me, how did you get started? How did you know where you were supposed to go? And where did it all start? So as this is a UFO conference, I'll go back to the very first UFO sighting I had, which led to the communication with the ET of the ship that led to most of this travelling. So the first sighting is, this is the slide that's up there now, is actually in Leeds. Russell recognised this one, because as well. And this is the Town Hall clock at Morley, which is part of Leeds. And my first sighting was on a Wednesday night about 10 years ago now, I think. And I used to play badminton in the sports centre there, so the car park you see from the Town Hall was just a car park for the Leisure Centre, just like where we are now. Exactly the same type of building, the same sort of car park. We used to go there every Wednesday night and play badminton, just like anybody else. Came out of the sports hall one night, just had to put my racket into the booth. I looked over the top of the booth, and to the left of the town hall there was an orange pulsating lozenge, best described it. It was a summer evening, there was hardly any clouds in the sky at all, so it was a light blue background, no obstructions in the way whatsoever. And this object attracted my eye at first, but bear in mind we're near Leeds and Bradford Airport here, so it's not unusual to see airplanes. But this was nothing like an aeroplane. It was pulsating, huge orange lozenge shape. And then I couldn't take my eyes off it when I first saw it, and it started moving towards the clock tower very slowly, with no sound at all. And I was thinking in my head, I should look around and see if anybody else can see this, but I daredn't take my eyes off it in case it disappeared and I watched it. So I kept watching it slowly, and it went very, very slowly. I don't know whether it was minutes or seconds, but it appeared to be a long period of time. And the other factor which I've since read about, which happened, was people talk about the Oz factor. I don't know if anybody has heard of that before, but it's when everything around you seems to stand still and all noises seem to cease, even bird noises. And it's as if you're in a bubble experiencing the sighting, but yet you're still there, you're still looking at the car park and everything's in front of you, but it feels like you're in a dead room, it's acoustically, no sound whatsoever. And that happened with me at the same time. So this lozenge continued to move to the right, and it eventually went just behind the town hall, so I could then get a sort of an idea of how far away it was, because I had no idea the distance at all. And I had no idea of the size because there was no reference point, but I had the horizon and the side of the tower to go on, so I could see the real object moving behind the clock tower. And it eventually came out the other side of the clock tower and moved to the right and got to sort of near the end of the photograph, this photograph. Then it stopped dead, it paused for a moment, and then it started to backtrack and reverse back the way it came. Still no sound, no flashing lights, no navigation lights, just an orange lozenge. And it returned part of the way back towards the town hall clock, and then it just vanished, which you've probably heard about many, many times. People say it's just like a light switch just turned on. And this was the case with this one. It disappeared, I'm left staring at the black sky, still there to move in case it came back again. And That was my first incident. Then I actually pulled my eyes away and looked around to see if anybody else has noticed it. But nobody seemed to be looking in the sky, and so I started asking all questions and started counteracting what I'd just seen, saying, oh, it's a helicopter, it's a plane. But, so I drove off, went back home that night. And the more I thought about it, the more I knew it was not a conventional aircraft. It was definitely not anything you normally see around. But the strange thing is that when that following week, believe that on the same night, I looked up and see if I could see the lozenge again, expecting it to be there like you do, the silly things that you do. And of course it wasn't. But on the way home, driving back home, I noticed a sort of star in the sky. It seemed to be following me. And I know something about stars in the sky. This was moving with me. And eventually got close to home, and this thing was still in front of me. So this, it looks now like a star. It's a very bright white light. And I got almost home within sort of 500 yards, and came to a T junction. There were two cars in front of me, and the star was off to my right. But I noticed something really strange then. As the first car turned right, this light blinked out. It just switched off as the headlights turned past it. And then as the car had gone past, the star came back on again. Well, the star don't do that, it does. And then the second car did exactly the same thing, turned right, and it blanked off again. So I could see there was an intelligent communication. As their headlights were going that direction, the light would switch off. So there was some intelligence with it, which confirmed sort of the first thing I thought about the week before, that it was intelligent. So instead of myself turning left and going home, I turned right. I thought I'd chase it, like you do, chase the UFO down the street. So I turned right, and of course the same thing happened. It blanked out. So I thought, well, I know where it is, so I'll keep driving down this road, it might appear again. It didn't, so I drove for 10 minutes down the road, and I got out of the car and looked, and it never appeared again. So that was my first two major sightings that started me off. I was already interested in UFOs, but this got me more and more into my first own personal sightings. By the way, I've seen over 70 now, so I don't even want to count it. I've lost count now. In fact, we, on the same subject, we saw them last Wednesday night. Yeah, Wednesday night, that was near our home. So the reason is that communication has gone on with the actual beings on board the ship. I didn't know that at this time. So after this sort of sighting, communication started happening. The ETs communicated, and it turns out that the pilot and his partner were the ones that were communicating with me. And started to give me loads and loads of knowledge, of Earth knowledge, ancient knowledge, why ETs were visiting. This particular group of ETs were hybrids, and I have spoken about this before, but they were doing a program of hybriding humans with ETs. It had been going on for 75 years, and they were coming to the end of it, so it's now actually finished. But I'm only talking about their particular race of beings. They said other beings are doing different things, but that's what they're actually here for to do. So communication went on, and I kept seeing more and more UFOs. And the next major incident that happened was at Gulf Breeze in Pensacola, which, for anybody who doesn't know where it is, who hasn't read the books, is the very north of Florida. So not down where Orlando is, right at the north end in the Gulf of Mexico. And this next slide is it's a picture of the shoreline at Gulf Breeze. There's been many books written on Gulf Breeze and the events that happened there, but I had my own personal experience there. I went for a 1-week holiday hoping that I'd see a UFO, because I read all the books. Which seems ludicrous if you think about it. Why should they just be there when I turn up? But I went every night to this shoreline car park, which is this the picture here. There is another slide as well, which is the next one, which just shows you the view of the car park from there's a small jetty that goes out into the Gulf. And this is where all the locals go on a regular basis. They meet up and stand in this car park and wait for UFOs because that's where they've seen them over the years. So I joined in with the locals, got used to talking to a few Americans, some of them UFO researchers. I went there every night for the week and didn't see anything until it got to the last night, which was Sunday night. And as I was driving towards this site, about 7 o'clock, I saw a UFO to my left as I was coming over the bridge to get to this actual car park. And it was actually sort of red, orangey ball of light. And it moved really quickly and then disappeared. But when I arrived at the car park, there were 3 people there, they were really excited. As soon as I got out of the car, they leapt towards me and said, we've seen one, you've just missed it. But no, I haven't just missed it, I've seen it on the way here. So this was the start of events. The whole evening was then full of UFOs basically. And it got to the stage where the 12 of us stood on this shoreline. And we witnessed, it was actually in the next day's paper, so the account said that there was 12 of us, and it started roughly about 7:20 on that evening. And over that evening, we approximated that we saw about 19 UFOs. The thing is about UFOs, they move so fast and they blink in and out. It's like a fireworks display. You don't know whether you're seeing 2 or 3 UFOs doing the same thing, or are you actually seeing 19 different UFOs. So between us, we added up between 14 and 19 that we actually see. And they would basically be of an amber-orange sort of light, and they would jump from spot to spot, disappear and turn up somewhere else. And then they would illuminate like a Roman candle, as if they were sort of turning on a really bright light and would explode. But there is something really strange that goes with this incident, and I've never read it anywhere in any UFO book, but we all witnessed it. And it was, before these events started, there was what can only be described as an airquake, not an earthquake, an airquake. The whole sky seemed to erupt, but it wasn't like thunder or lightning, and the locals, they said, no, we get storms here regular, that's not a storm. And this happened about 7:10, 7:15 before these events happened. And after the events had happened, so at 9:30 to 10 o'clock, there was also another airquake. And I spoke to the locals who'd seen many sightings there, and they said they'd never heard it before. And this was, the synchronicity of this event happening just before the sighting was very relevant. As I say, nobody has ever reported on that, ever in any book I've ever read. But to me, I feel that it was, the noise was some opening of some doorway to allow the craft to come in. And then when they left, they sort of closed the doorway again. This noise, I feel, was maybe some doorway opening and closing. So it's only a theory, but somebody else may have come across it since then. But it'd be interesting to know whether anybody's ever heard anything about an airquake. It was news to me. So this whole evening was, I say, over sort of two and a half hours, and witnessed by 12 different people. And these were different objects, or the same objects moving around really fast. But what's really odd about this place is surrounded by naval bases next door to it, and US Air Force bases next door to it as well. And how this concluded this evening was, we were looking at basically 4 UFOs left out at the end of the evening. We had 3 pairs of binoculars as well, so we were able to look at them closely. And some of the people were saying they could see actual lights on them, but only when you look through the binoculars. And they looked like they were revolving or moving rapidly through the binoculars. But the last event of the evening was, there were 4 UFOs left, and then to our right came in 2 US Air Force jets, probably, I think they said they're either 15s or 18s. And they were from the local Air Force base. And they actually chased off the last 4 remaining UFOs, and we watched them chase them out to sea. And the slide that you see now is a couple of months later from this event, but the front page of the news was UFOs are real and the military know about them, because the picture on that front of that paper was in broad daylight. They had a saucer-shaped craft and a military jet in the same photograph. And not only that, but they actually crossed over each other until one was on top of the other one in the photograph. So there was no imposed photograph on there. They actually crossed over each other, which for photographers is excellent because you've got one item on top of another one, which is excellent evidence. So it was a superb photograph in broad daylight. It never got any further than the Gulf breeze. We never heard about it in England, didn't get out the news, nobody said anything about it whatsoever. That amazes me. I'm absolutely stunned that you can have an event like that with the military involved, but nobody gets to hear about it whatsoever. Yet in Gulf breeze, it's common knowledge, even on the front page of their newspaper. So that was the end of that night's events, apart from one other thing that happened. I returned back to my hotel, which was actually on the beach. So it was only a few yards of beach and then the actual Gulf of Mexico. I went to sleep that night, still excited about what had gone on. I eventually got to sleep. But at 1:05 in the morning, I was woken up by an intense pressure on my third eye. And it was as if I was speaking to myself. I'm telling myself to go to the window and look out the window. And myself is replying and saying, no, I can't bother getting up, I'm tired. No, I won't go to the window. Now my other self would say again, no, go to the window, open it and look outside. So this went on for 2 or 3 minutes, sort of arguing with what I thought was myself. It turned out it wasn't myself. I was being spoken to by extraterrestrial friends. So eventually I got up on the curtains and I was looking at it was quite dark, there's no lights out to sea. And I could hear the waves and see the waves ripping on the shore. There was nothing there, so I said to myself, there, I've done it now, I'm going back to bed. And as soon as I said that, a UFO basically appeared out of the water and just rose just between sort of the line of the water and the line of the sky. And it was just a luminous light. You couldn't see any detail on it because it was dark and it wasn't close enough to show this actual ship. So I don't know how many seconds went by again, because time just seemed to stand still. And I stood looking at it again, I couldn't believe it after what happened that evening. And so eventually it just popped out. I don't know whether it went down or whether it went up, but it just disappeared. The next day, before I left to come back to England, I actually got a chance to speak to someone else, a local, and I was talking about UFOs, and they'd seen a UFO, and then they said, well, we see them regularly. So the people you should really talk to are the fishermen. So why the fishermen? So, well, they go out at night and they fish off the old pier, which is broken in half. And it was a bridge that used to go across the bay, but it's split in the middle. And they fish off that, and they go out at night, they fish all night, and then they pack up to the daylight the next day. And she said that the fishermen regularly see underwater craft going out of the bay that are about the size of, they're guessing really, about the size of a Volkswagen, they're saying. And they light up the water underneath and they travel without a wave being caught. And they've seen them because they've been on the bridge above fishing and they've seen it go below them out to the Gulf and return in the early hours of the morning. So it's a regular occurrence of them. I don't know whether this is still going on now, because I said this was in the 90s when this happened. So again, you've got witnesses that aren't really into the UFO thing, but they've seen an event happen that you could attribute to being underwater UFOs or whatever. But that ties together with what I saw of something coming out of the actual sea. So this information has been around for a long, long time, but it's still not common knowledge, which is really surprising for the UFO information that comes out. It just seems to get blanketed, and that's it. That's the end of it. So that was another event. All the time this was going on, I had communication with the ET. So when Christine and myself got together later on, after these events, that's when it all really started to really move, and they wanted us to go do the Stargates. So I've got other incidents. So many incidents happened, and it's ongoing. It's right up to date. I'm talking about 90s, but it hasn't stopped. It's still ongoing, even up to last week, which I'll get into later. As the next slide is, All right, this is a separate incident. This has never been spoken about because it happened to a close friend of mine. It's never been publicised. And it's actually struck my friend who knew me really well. I used to work with him. He knew all about UFOs and things. And he was quite open to it. He used to like listening to my little stories, get him entertained at work. But an event happened to him that really shook him. And from that moment on, he went silent. And he didn't want to talk about the subject anymore. And this happened in North Yorkshire. This was in the Malton Pickering area. He was leaving work, so I saw him on Friday evening, left to go to a caravan in the Malton Pickering area. Again, it was summer's evening, so he was travelling across through the York region to get over to Malton. And this road that's shown on here is a back road off the A1 going towards Malton Pickering. He had a campsite there, which I don't exactly know where it is. But I went back to the place so that I got an idea of what he was talking about. And he said he was driving down the road, it was still light, but starting to get darker. And ahead of him, sort of a few hundred yards ahead, he saw what he thought was an old Victorian, you know those carousels that get fun fairs where the horses go round and round, they're old and tough. This is how his brain was working. This is what happens to you when you see events that you can't explain. His brain told him he was looking at a carousel in the middle of the road, but hovering above the road, 3 or 4 feet above the road. And then, obviously, his other side of his brain kicked in and he said, well, wait, whoa, it's not. And then he realised what it was. It's a UFO. So he got really excited. I'm going to catch up with it. This is what happens. Your brain kicks in, you either do ridiculous things or you run a mile. In this instant, he never thought of any fear or anything. He just said, right, I'm going to follow it. So he puts his foot down in the car, tries to catch up with this thing, and this thing then takes off and flies down this avenue of trees that you can actually see here. And he tries to keep up with it. It shot off at quite tremendous speed, but he still insisted on following it. And you could see when it shot down to the end of this avenue of trees and then turned sharp right. And when we looked at the map later, it was heading towards Malton. So he followed it best he could, but he obviously couldn't keep up with it. As he was travelling down between these avenue of trees, his mind was focused on following this UFO. But what really scared him was the next minute there was a huge roar of engines, and a military helicopter came straight over the top of his car with a searchlight down on the ground. So it came over the top of his car, and of course he was suddenly lit up by a light, this roar of an engine. And it really scared him. It frightened him because it was just sudden, he wasn't really ready for it. And bear in mind, myself and him used to go to air shows all the time. We're familiar with airplanes, he knows lots about military aircraft, we're very familiar with aircraft noises, we know about helicopters. But he's not somebody that's naive and doesn't know what's going on in the air. And as soon as it had gone over, he immediately identified it as a gazelle. The helicopter was a gazelle. And there was no markings on it. He was looking for the usual markings, where it was from, and the registration numbers. And he told me later, so there was nothing on it. It was the regular sort of looking gazelle, but there was no marking whatsoever that you could see. So he carried on. He was still trying to follow the UFOs. He carried on down this road. And then there was another car pulled up, and they were obviously watching the UFO that shot off to their right. So they got out of the car, and they were looking at it. So he pulled up behind them at the end of this avenue of trees, and he watched it go off into the distance towards Malton. But the helicopter also took a right turn and chased, ridiculous it sounds, the helicopter chased the UFO off to the right towards Malton, and that's the last time we saw both of them. But the after effects on my friend, unfortunately, he was more frightened by the helicopter than he was the actual UFO. And from then on, he told me about the incident, but after that, he went quiet and he said, well, if I spoke about UFO conferences or anything, he just switched off. He wasn't really interested in it, so it really shaken him up. But and if I ever referred back to the subject, and I said, a few years later I spoke to him again and said, do you still remember that incident? Yeah. Are you still sticking to what you say? He said, well, yeah, I thought it was a carousel. I said, I can't believe I thought that. It was so stupid, but I did think it was one of those carousels. And then the next incident, it wasn't. It was a definite UFO, but it was the width of the road, and it was revolving slowly. There were lights on it. It was revolving. It was lit up and it had a sort of light and aura around it. It wasn't a definite colour, it was all sorts of colours. So but he still stuck by that story, and it's never been reported. He didn't report it to anybody. I didn't report it to anybody because he was a personal friend. So that's the first time that has actually been spoken about at all since that's again the mid-90s. So we're quite interested in it. So we'll move further on. Those that have seen me speak before may have seen this actual monument before. For those who haven't, it's in Greece, it's Naxos, Greece. And this is actually a doorway as well. It is a dimensional doorway, but it was used for just accessing things around the actual world. It's not interdimensional, it's just for use of moving objects from A to B around the world. So, I mean, the Greeks obviously say that it was a temple to Apollo, but that's all the stories, that they have to give you some sort of story behind it. But as I've said before, the actual construction of this, the material came from Cairo, the construction from the material came from Cairo. It was transported from Egypt to Greece and constructed in Greece. So going back way before the times when they say it was done, way before. And as yet, of course, they can't date stone. Carbon dating was not date stones. They still haven't got a method of telling you how long the thing when it was built. So, but that's the information we received, that that's how it was built. So it's built from stone from Cairo, and it is a sort of a doorway. You could call it a bilocation chain, if you like. You transmit articles or artifacts from one part of the world to another. So that's on. The reason why I mentioned this is where we were staying for a few days on Greece, and it was another site that we had there where I was staying in a studio, again on the beach, right next to the sea again. But this time, communication came from our friendly team, and he told us to wait till 10 at night. This was 9:30 when he told us. So wait till 10:30, and we'll turn up. And he did. 10:30, his craft turned up again, and he hung around for hours and hours. We stood up and got bored basically, watching him just move around very slowly. And when we asked what he was doing energy clearing of the actual Greek islands. So they have got, these extraterrestrials have got their own personal mission to aid the planet. It's not all just, it's not abducting people as the negative side of it. They are here to actually do work on the planet and raise the energies, just the same as people here get this sort of pull and inspiration to go do work for the planet. And one of the two things I have mentioned before, but in case anyone hasn't heard me, that two things that they introduced to us was they introduced BSE into the system so that we would take notice of the amount of meat, the way that we used meat, the way that we shifted it around the globe was not good for us whatsoever. They weren't advocating being vegetarians, it was just to show that we're overeating meat and it's not very good for the system to be having so much meat per day. So that was the idea of introducing BSE. But the thing that really interested me was they introduced a bug into the water systems, especially in the UK, to actually eliminate the bacteria that was around at the time we introduced it. And most of our rivers were getting in a real state. We were getting documentaries about 10 years ago of the severe state of the waters, fish was dying. And they said they introduced a bug that would eat the bacteria within the rivers. And if you look at the situation today, this is what's really interesting, is that we're now getting otters returning back to where rivers were completely polluted, and people now can go to certain places in British Isles and they can see otters, they can see more wildlife, and there's fish returning to the Thames. We heard from a friend the other day that they'd seen 2 dolphins in the Thames in London, which is absolutely incredible. You think the rivers were called polluted. But this is down to the actual work that our visitors have been doing. So there is lots of good coming out of it. It's not all negative stuff that's been written in books over the years. It's some good stuff, and it's ongoing. These people communicating with me, they go away for lengths of time, but they come back in and they're still ongoing, still working on the Earth plane. So I've just another incident to show you that the reason why I've seen so many UFOs is there's a direct link between me and the extraterrestrial race. So I'll go on to another incident, getting more and more up to date. This was August last year. This is Spain. This is just behind Benidorm and Calpe in Spain, Costa del Sol, around, I think. And we stayed with a friend. This is a friend's house. We stayed up in the mountains, and she was guided to buy this house by extraterrestrials. They showed her where to buy the house. We went over for a holiday and visited, and a UFO turned up, guided us to go into the mountains, and she stopped communication with the ET same time. And said, we want you to buy a house in this location, and showed us where they wanted it to be. And this was the house that she ended up buying. She's a single woman, she's 64, she left Glastonbury totally on her own and bought this in the mountains. And it takes a good 20 minutes to get from sea level up to these mountains with a 4x4 vehicle over rough terrain, so she really is isolated, solar panels and all the rest of it. But she sees ETs regularly because this is one of their sort of hotspots in Spain. But again, people will know about this because only the locals will know about the actual sighting. So over the period of 2 weeks that we stayed there, we saw 10 UFOs over that period in Spain. And they were coming basically from, you can see the terrain, what it's like. It's very hilly, it's above the actual sea. It's about in a straight line, it's about 2 miles from the coast. And they were appearing over this land. And every night the weather was fantastic. It was really hot, so we were out every night, standing out till 2 a.m. in the morning. And it coincided with a meteor shower that same week, which was fantastic to watch that as well. But there's a distinct difference between meteor shower and UFOs. Even people that know about astronomy and into it would easily see that these craft were intelligently controlled and were flying in a totally different way to the way the meteor shower was coming in. But what was interesting, we were seeing UFOs on different race of beings. They weren't all from the same race. And one, I actually caught one over the horizon flying one night. And I caught it out the corner of my eye, I looked to the right, saw it, and it suddenly blinked out like they usually do. And an immediate message came back to me, you weren't supposed to see us. And it was really clear in my head, as if somebody actually spoke to me, you weren't supposed to see us. Now I don't know what that means, whether that means that they were a different race and I'm not supposed to see them and I'm only supposed to see a certain race of beings. I don't know how that works, but that was really obvious to me. That I caught them flying around and I just happened to see them. And immediately I saw them, they switched it off and they were invisible again. So that was quite fascinating 2 weeks. I haven't seen 10 UFOs in 2 weeks. The people sat here thinking, why don't I see a UFO? And why I want to see them, why don't I see them? I can't answer that. I don't know how it works at all. The only reason why we see many is because we're doing work for the planet. The race that I'm in touch with, they're doing work for the planet, and that's why there's this information coming backwards and forwards, because we're both doing the same mission. So down the next voices. I don't know how that slide's got in there actually, but that's actually one of the sacred sites around the world. It's in Peru again, and it's 3 layers of a wall that are built in an amazing construction to bring those blocks together. We were told that it wasn't built by the Incas or the Mayans, whatever. The ETs told us that it was an ancient race and they built it, so basically it goes back thousands and thousands of years. But it's attributed to the Incas actually building it, but they didn't build it. But the story that goes with that, maybe related to that, was when we were in Peru, we bumped into some archaeologists that were in Cusco in the Spanish church, and they were digging up the floor. And we were doing energy work, finding underground buildings by using psychic facilities. And we were actually, one of them approached us and said, are you able to sense things under the ground? And I noticed what you're doing. This was an archaeologist. We said, well, yeah, that's what we do. We can sense where the wall is and the ancient monuments that are built below what you see on the surface. So he said, could you come with me and help me out for a few minutes? Sort of sounds a bit obvious, but he took us into the Spanish church and they'd ripped up half of the floor, the marble floor. And then he explained to us, we're looking for 2 tunnels that run from here 3 kilometres up the mountain to this site that was on the, which is the same place again that's on the slide now. It's called Sassy Woman is the actual place. And they knew, the new archaeologists knew, were built by ancient races. And they said, we're looking for 2 tunnels that run from below the church up to this site. And we've just used all the technical equipment. We use a radar to actually detect walls on the ground, which you now see on time team and things like that, ladies the same type of equipment. And he said, I want you to verify, or try and verify, that where we think these tunnels are, they are actually there. So we were walking up and down an area like this inside the church, sensing where the tunnels were, and I was telling them exactly where the wall was at the end of the tunnels. And there were 2 tunnels about 3 metres wide, and we detected both of them, and then he just laughed and said, that's exactly where we found where they are. So we're going to lift the whole floor, and we're going to try and get to these tunnels, because in the 1920s and 30s, some people went down these, but they never came back out again. So, and we believe that the locals call it Shambhala. They believe that there's an ancient treasure there, and these were the tunnels that we've been searching for a long, long time. And they tried it in the 20s and 30s, but every time someone went down there, they didn't return. Only one chap had come back, and he said there was gold down there, and the tunnels were self-lit. Now again, we're back to the ancient ones, the ETs. The tunnels are self-lit because it's the ancient races that built them in the first place. Again, it was the Incas. And so these archaeologists, they were from Texas, and I went on the internet recently, and on their site, and the research is still ongoing. Graham Hancock knows a lot about it. He's got this information on his site as well. So if you want to look up about this ancient place, it's on Graham Hancock's site. And the tunnels actually travelled 3 kilometres, and where they came out of the other end was, they don't know it, but we know that there used to be 2 pyramids there, and what's left of it is just 2 big mounds. And they used to be 2 huge pyramids that have been collapsed over the years, and the tunnels came up to the bottom of the 2 pyramids. So that was really interesting. And that's probably why that slide's in there, because you've got the ET connection again, you've got ancient artefacts, and you've got archaeologists working. And also in they found under the floor, we arrived just as they'd uncovered one room which had about 14 bodies in it, and all the heads had been decapitated and the bones were spread out all over the place. So they think there was some sort of massacre had gone on under the floor of the church. They've been there I don't know how many years. But they don't think they were ancient bones. They think it's probably maybe going back as far as the Spanish, when the actual Spanish were annihilating most of the Incas at the time. So they think that they were probably killed at the time and buried into the Spanish church that was built on top. So there's all sorts of events go on with these things, and you get lots of layers and layers of artifacts which archaeologists get confused with. But what I'm trying to point out is there's ancient races of beings have been coming. ETs have been there all along, and they've built many of these artifacts. And this is the information I've been told by the ETs along over these years that we've been sort of travelling around the world. Right. So up to date, that's the end of the slides, but bringing up to date even last week, now there are many communications over the last week with different beings. Don't just get ETs, you get many other beings on different levels of existence, different vibrations. And occasionally we get taken out by ETs, sometimes physically, sometimes just the energy body's taken out, and the conversations go on with the energy bodies, between my energy body and their energy body. People call it out of body, souls leaving, one of the bodies are leaving. It doesn't matter what you call it, but you actually, the consciousness can leave this body behind and actually communicate out of this body. And last week, sometimes it's taken physically. Last week, I was put to sleep, and Christine was taken out last week, physically taken out, and she ended up with bruises on her legs, which I've got photographs of, which doesn't make previous things, but just to show you that there's some physical contact sometimes. It's not always just out of the body, sometimes it's physical when they actually do it. And these beings were from the Pleiades star system, a different section of beings to the ones I used in communication with. So once you open up to the whole process, you can communicate with different races of ETs. It's not restricted to one race because there are many taking part. And then it moves on to communicating with different beings of higher vibration that no longer require a physical body. When I say an ET, what I actually mean is a being that still occupies a body, still occupies a vehicle. They're a higher vibration than we are, but they're still inside an actual body. That's what I call an ET. Once you start talking to beings that don't occupy a body, you can call them light beings or get into the realms of called an angel or an ascended master. They are still highly evolved beings of a higher vibration, and they still communicate on the same wavelength. They communicate just the same as the ETs do. So I'm trying to say is there's not really any definition between us inside a human body and the ETs inside their body and these other beings that don't have any body at all. It's all to do with the same consciousness. It's just a changing of energies that communicate. So that's what's still going on, and it's still going to continue to go on. Last year we went to Mexico and Ireland and Egypt last year. That was a quiet year. We keep going back to Egypt because that's the centre of where the civilization of the ETs started. That's why there's so much interest in actual Egypt, because that's where the civilization started. How am I doing for time, Sam? So just about run dry.
About another 10 minutes.
Right, should we open it to questions?